So the next section is self-presentation. Just one point that I want to make is people tend to think and often think, right, that our online presentation or any sort of presentation, those kind of not very sophisticated memes where it's like Instagram versus reality. Well, I mean, I guess the more the better way to read that would be this is something that we're aware of, like even popularly, right? Like, well, or that's precisely what they're talking about, right? Is that like this idea of like the fake you versus the real you, right? These authors, and I've brought this up in class too, is that like we need to get away from this kind of vertical hierarchy and treat them horizontally as if they're just different iterations or versions, right? None of us are the same person at every juncture. We all behave differently. So getting past this idea that it's artificial or overly constructed, right? But rather, they point out Sherry Turkle's notion that not only is this still the case, but that historically, for a very, very long time, humans, like we as people, we have consistently performed in roles and frames, right? As if we're actors, and acting the role of the son, the teacher, the fool, right? Okay, so to kind of move on to the next section, which is increasingly accessible and moral communication. I think one real piece of insight that I didn't get, that I got from this reading that I had never thought about is in doing this ethnographic study across the world, it becomes clear that social media is accessible and accessible as a public sphere. That part of what can be kind of really fascinating and sometimes frustrating, but also illuminating, is the fact that on a place like Facebook, you are put in contact with millions of people that you just would not have any sort of access to, before historically. Just people from all sorts of walks of life. But what the writers consistently show is that a lot of those people, are people that did not have access to a kind of a general public sphere. And these are people that are coming from very different walks of life, and as the writers point out, very, very different positions from you and I. A lot of them coming from much more difficult living situations and contexts, and also different levels of I'm trying to be really careful, which is why I'm kind of stumbling, but also of literacy, levels of literacy, right? But they all want to participate, and social media makes it participate, as do memes. And so I do think that, because social media can be so, the toxicity is so strong, and I'm not even talking about the sort of extreme iterations of homophobia and sexism and racism, but even on just a very mundane, casual level, we're all so sort of kind of judgmental and overly kind of just nasty and really sort of mean to one another. And so I think that's something to think about, next time you want to fire off about a supporter of your opposite politics, about how much of an idiot they are, is that that person might be coming from a very, very different background. And even if they're kind of spitting in your face too, I think we have to kind of really take this reading seriously in that regard, and that it's kind of, if we think that social media and new media are so great as we always say they are, then we should kind of put our money in our mouth and engage other people with that same sort of sense of liberation and democracy, as opposed to using it as a platform to just constantly tear down other people, right? And similarly, it's if we care so much about universal access, as much as we say we do, then it's a great thing that everyone does have access, and they are bringing themselves to that platform, warts and all. That is in many senses a kind of beautiful thing. Unless, of course, ultimately, honestly, we're just advocating for gatekeeping. And if that's what it is, I think, you have to be honest about it. It's like, do we actually, what we're actually interested in saying is that like, no, you guys get to come in and you don't, because that doesn't align with notions of universal access, right? Just doesn't, right? On 172, to kind of, and in relation to that, the writers point out that like memes as both a mechanism of normalization and normalcy, but also moralization, right? So it's not just that, like, how do we kind of designate what's normal? So memes are often like, pointing out like sort of, are often at the expense of someone and sort of ridiculing a certain type of behavior. So it designated it as abnormal and as amoral, right? So there's also this kind of linking that what is normal is what is moral, right? Which, like, again, I don't, it's not a great way, because, it's like the one who is judging, what gives them that sort of authority, right? Like, where does that come from? And the answer to that question is usually not great. And so this idea that they point out of like an internet police, right, on 172. But the thing is like, who are the internet police? It's me, it's you, it's us, right? We're the ones that are doing the policing, right? Not in a real sense, like it's me. In the next section, Scalable Sociality, they talk about this very useful idea of that's, to kind of tie all this other stuff in, the idea of multiple publics, right? So a Facebook chat with your best friend, a messenger chat, might be very different from a group chat, might be very different from, all sorts of snafus are happening on Zoom, right? Because people are just trying to figure out what are the new rules, right? To differing degrees of horror to those people, right? Probably comedy for everyone else. But there are new rules, and we have to be careful. And they talk about this, right? It's like, this kind of constant fear that maybe, you'll say something wrong in a classroom or a Facebook group, but you could say it elsewhere. If it's not clear, like this is something that's happening, I think we're seeing the multiple publics play out in politics as well. It became a very big issue in 2016, if you know what I'm talking about. If you know, maybe you don't. But similarly, there is a constant between those multiple publics and the roles that we're playing. There is this also constant policing, right, between what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And finally, on the conclusion, the writers point out that, all of this can kind of come back to, like Nakamura, how gender, this is on 180, is normatively constructed. And again, we can read someone like Judith Butler here too, that morally and normatively, our identities are also something that are constantly being sort of like set up. Like, this is the way you can behave, this is the way that you can't behave. Oh, you were a man or you were a woman. And the key thing, right, is that, for all of these writers, the key thing to remember is like, who's doing the constructing, who's doing the policing? It's us, right? It's you and me. We're doing it to ourselves, and we're doing it to one another. And that is something that should give us pause, because, and then these are not like new thoughts, nor are they, like alien to you and I, but it's like, do unto others, like the golden rule, right? But it's like, we hate this, that people do this to us, and yet how much are we ourselves participating? And to go back to a point from a few days ago, a few lectures ago, one of the readings, it's like, what's the breaking point? At what point do we say, like, enough? Okay, so those are the readings for today. It's kind of rainy and dreary here, but hope you all are doing well, and I will talk to you. Oh yeah, I'm really glad that we're getting a discussion going. Kind of feels like we're going back to normal, but I'll talk to you guys soon.